BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
So this is the main courses. We've done it in Mediterranean styles, North African styles. You get a lot of it's a mezze-style, so you can make your own if you're not sure what you want.
I'm standing in line for lunch with chef Raouf Mansour, who designed and runs this large, brightly sunlit canteen. On one side, there are salads set out in big, colourful ceramic dishes, greens and bulgur wheat, broccoli, red cabbage, grated carrots, chickpeas, all of them perked up with fresh herbs. There are glass jars of pickles and several different dressings. On the other side, the hot dishes, served by the chefs who cooked them.
So we've got the smoked cheddar, potato cheesecake. It was done in tarragon sauce and a fennel salad is to cut through it. We got North African, Middle Eastern salmon, really nice, brown rice, pickled red cabbage and pickled cucumber, really nice and light. It's decadent.
I have the potato and cheesecakes, and they are seriously good. This isn't a gallery or a museum. This is where staff and visitors at St Peter's Hospital in Chertsey in Surrey eat. Breakfast and lunch. The rest of the time it's a coffee shop. The coffee their own brand and the cakes baked in the kitchen just behind the counter.
I'm a medical student. And today we had harissa, baked salmon and rice. We've been on placement in other hospitals, but I'd say out of everywhere, this has probably given us the best food.
So other hospitals, we'd usually go out to get food, and it wouldn't necessarily be the healthiest. Whereas coming to St. Peter's, you have all these great, very nutritious options, which is excellent. I mean, you just feel good. You feel good eating good food.
I never bring lunch when I'm in the hospital because the quality of the food there is very high. They always have salad. And I feel like they have healthier options. I think in certain hospitals they have a lot of fried food.
So what happened here? I'm having lunch with Julian Fries, the founder of Neller Davis, a facilities management company that helps big companies organise their building maintenance, cleaning services and such like. But what's at the heart of Neller Davis is food. The story of how they got involved with St Peter's began in lockdown.
COVID came along, so suddenly the service provider was stuck with only about a quarter of the customers, and very quickly they realised they couldn't make it pay, and they came back to the trust and said, we need an extra 9%, at which my client at the time said, yeah, we'll prove what you can do for this extra 9%. So they came back with a proposal which certainly didn't address the issues around the poor quality food that was being provided. It was very much out of the packet and into the fryer type operation at £6, £7 a pop. So we said, we'll help you bring it back in-house, at which the trust said, OK, well, why not?
At the time, staff were being given food for free by caterers and restaurants who'd lost trade and wanted to support the NHS like the rest of us.
That set a benchmark as well, because the quality of the food was coming in from event caterers, so it wasn't just pasties and pies and stuff. At that time, because the industry was kind of shut, the offices were shut, we were working for a legal firm in the city, and the caterer there, Bartlett Mitchell, they had a bunch of guys who were on furlough, bored. So I said to their chief executive, we're doing this project, I've got 6 weeks to do this, can you help us out? They went, yep, we're in.
And that's when Raouf Mansour joined. Now, he and his team produce food so good that the majority of staff at the hospital eat daily in the canteen. More money coming in, quality of food up, more money coming in. It's a virtuous circle.
Yeah, okay, we're going into the kitchen.
In the kitchen, Raouf enthusiastically shows me how it's not just food for the canteen that's made here, but food for all the snack outlets scattered around the hospital.
Everything is made in-house. We don't hold a lot of stock. As you can see, that is the smallest walk-in fridge you will see forever. We make all the cakes on site.
How much freedom do you have in where you source your ingredients from?
So it's a lot of suppliers that I work with. I don't call them suppliers, we call them partners. We have a regular meeting. It's somebody then you can pick up the phone and have a proper conversation about the origin of your food, what you want to do with your food. We've got a nice supportive procurement guys. As long as we do the due diligence, we can put them into our supply chain. Easy work, what you got in the season. We commercial enterprise, so we got small subsidies. That subsidies when I first taken over was in the region about 800,000. We used to only attract about 20%, 30% of the population. Now it's attracting about nearly 80% within the hospital. So in 3 years now, the income went from 500 to nearly 2 million. The subsidy went down from 800,000 slowly to 53 last year, and we reckon we could break even.
What I was hearing from Raouf is the opposite of what we're commonly told about large-scale catering, which is to keep prices low, ingredients have to be purchased well in advance from the cheapest supplier, then cooked in bulk with minimum staff. Here, at the kitchens in St. Peter's Hospital, they make more by selling more, and they sell more by making the food delicious with skilled chefs trained by Raouf.
It's the skills of the chef to turn it to something more enjoyable. If you bought in the sauce ready and you bought the potato cake ready from a natural supplier, it will cost you £3 a head. While you're making it, it will cost £1.20 to make.
But you have skilled staff, you must have to...
It's exactly, we invested in training the staff. That investment, the original investment, is training the staff.
It's interesting, Julian, because Natalie and I have just come back from Copenhagen. We were looking at the policy on organics, and in a hospital like this, or a care home or a school, it has to be 90% organic, and most places hit that. That couldn't happen here, could it?
It can. I think, Raouf is fairly close to that. It's the cost of producing the food and the skills and that aspect.
Are you saying that it's not the ingredients, it's skilled workers, it's the culture, it's how you source things? You could do it organically if somebody up there would go, okay, buy organic.
If it's properly managed with the right people, properly engaged, all the things you've spoken about and Raouf said, it matters less about the cost of the ingredients as opposed to how many people you serve, how many times they come back, repeat business, and it's a self-fulfilling cycle.
You began this for the staff mostly. I mean, visitors come in here too. And when I dropped in 2 years ago, there was talk about how you were going to transfer those values to the patients in the wards. And this kitchen is nowhere near big enough. So what happened?
Yes, but we looked at what can we do. The space is premium in any hospital. We couldn't find a piece of land to put CPU on, a central production kitchen. So we didn't have a lot of choice. What we're doing with patient catering, it was outsourced from national suppliers. At the same time, we wanted something different. So we went for tender and we looked at all the local suppliers, we taste all the food suppliers. And it was a fair tender process.
The food for patients is still being cooked off-site and reheated in the hospital, but there's change here too. What had started just 3 days before our visit was a move to sourcing patient meals from some smaller and more local caterers. Emer Jordan runs patient catering at Ashford and St. Peter's hospitals.
One is from Bracknell, which is about 20 minutes down the road, and this is their first entry into patient catering. And she started with a food truck 5 years ago, and it's all her own company. She cooked the meals herself for us for our first round. She made the first delivery. And our second one is a small company who did our children's meals. Using those two suppliers, we can go back to them and give the feedback. It's come back too spicy, the patients like this, they don't have, and they will tweak it for us. I think the chili con carne from Healthy Food Company, we did about 6 tastings on, and it was just little tweaks at the end to make it perfect. And even now, they can still change that.
Emer Jordan. Andy Jones is a former hospital caterer and chair of the Hospital Caterers Association. It was Andy who first persuaded me to visit St. Peter's. He's now working as an advisor to one of the big food service companies. I think it must be good advice from someone who's had experience both as a food provider and in recent years as a patient. He was with us in the kitchen, and I asked him if he thought these changes would make a difference to the people in hospital beds.
Having been in NHS catering myself since 1981, I've been through all the systems, and it always breaks my heart when patients are not served right. But then when you are a patient and that food is part of the recovery plan and you can't eat it, it's a shame. So it's now educating, and that's what's happening here. They're taking the revolution that's happened outside on the retail to the patient's bedside, and that will only happen with the companies becoming foodies. So the Coca-Cola Bells, the Bon Cleaners, the Nana K's, they're now becoming foodies, and they're listening to their patients, and that's so essential.
Andy Jones. Julian Frizz of Nella Davis has even higher ambitions. There are models, he says, in other countries that could work here.
It's called room service, where you have a massive kitchen and the patients can order their food and then it's delivered to them within 45 minutes. Those sort of things we're working on, but again it needs that significant level of investment. But it's absolutely possible, because if I took to a hospital in Holland and a few in America, it's already happening. We're just a little bit behind the curve, but if we can do things, so the staff catering was really important, get that right, you've motivated the staff in the first place, and then you've ended up getting more influence on the board. So that's the way to do it, by influence. It's getting away from this food's just an obligation.
It can be done. There's also so many, on my perspective, health and safety and the allergen control and all of that. The restrictions for patients is so much tighter than it would be in the retail outlets. So it's more than doable. It's just making sure you have all those controls in, and it's a big project piece to do.
Emer Jordan, Facilities Support Services Manager at St Peter's Hospital in Chertsey in Surrey, which is an inspiring place. Caterers working in public places, hospitals, schools, care homes, prisons, etc., serve over 2.6 billion meals every year in about 93,000 places across the UK. The government says its ambition is for 50% of food served in public places to be local or produced to high environmental standards, so that, they say, our farmers get a fair share of the £5 billion a year spent on public sector catering contracts. So, does the Chertsey Revolution tell us something about the possibilities of a wider change? Since we were at St Peter's, there have certainly been new developments. Things are changing fast. Posts on the social media platform LinkedIn, we see, document the success Nella Davis is already having at the canteen at the Whittington Hospital in North London, in my neighbourhood. But let's look at the bigger long-term picture. And to do that, we've drawn together a group of people who've been thinking and working on feeding the public well for a while. They're scattered between Cardiff, Blackpool and London, which is where I am, in a broadcasting house studio. First, let's go to Cardiff to talk to Kevin Morgan, Professor of Governance and Development at Cardiff University, and the author of the recently published Serving the Public, The Good Food Revolution in Schools, Hospitals and Prisons.
Kevin, welcome to the programme. That title describes a revolution. Is that what you're seeing now?
Well, in some places, yes, Sheila. What we've just heard from St Peter's is indicative of this good food revolution, which shows that sometimes it can be done. The problem is that this was being done 20 years ago in Cornwall. The Cornish NHS had a similar local food project. The problem is that good practice can sometimes be a bad traveller, and we need to disseminate good practice from one site to the whole system. That's the challenge in a nutshell.
I mean, in your book, you talk about the Cinderella status of food in public places, hospitals, schools, prisons, etc. And it seems that successive governments haven't cared. You talk about change coming from passionate people, but when passionate people retire and move on, you have to have policy in place. And that hasn't been the case.
That's exactly the point, Sheila. The two things that are missing is that those local innovations haven't been embedded in the organisations in which they were invented. So that's the local challenge. And then the national challenge is that food policies in the United Kingdom haven't been sufficiently supportive. In fact, I'd go so far as to say they've abdicated their public duty of care, because we haven't had a good food strategy in practice for many, many years.
We can trace this back a long way, but we can trace it back, can't we, to the culture of efficiency that came in with the Thatcher years. And you talk about the culture of low-cost procurement, which is linked to this efficient use of money.
Yeah, politicians are beginning to get the procurement message. The problem is that if you treat procurement as a silver bullet, you're setting it up to fail, because procurement needs to be integrated with policies for production, for fruit and veg, for example, as well as policies for consumption, because good food on the plate doesn't make an impact unless children in schools consume it.
You tell a story of the way that people who work in public procurement are kind of ignored by the structures of power. That there is something called the Public Sector Catering Alliance, and that organisation, and you were involved in this, sought a seat at the table of the Food and Drink Sector Council. That's the main body representing the food system from farm to fork in Westminster. Tell me what happened.
Well, I don't know a better example, Sheila, of the Cinderella status of the public food community in the UK than this story about the public sector wanting to get a seat at the top table. DEFRA, the ministry in charge of it, rejected their application and said that the public sector was already well represented at the Food and Drink Sector Council. And who was that by? It was by the boss of Campus, the biggest food service company in the world, but a private company. And that voice cannot be the voice of NHS, prisons and schools. It beggars belief that public community was ejected from that council.
And you've written again but had no response.
I've written a Dear DEFRA letter and I'm still waiting for the response. Maybe it's slow mail in England.
We asked the Department of Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, for their comment on this. They said, the Food and Drink Sector Council is currently paused while DEFRA focuses on developing the government's food strategy. But the government is committed to engaging with, I quote, a broad range of stakeholders to inform their approach to backing British producers, which includes the Public Sector Catering Alliance, with whom, DEFRA says, they have a positive and productive relationship.
Kath Dalmeny is with me in the studio in London. She's chief executive at Sustain. That's an organisation that works to support a better, fairer food system. Kath, one of the projects you're involved with is very much about piloting new ways of getting locally produced food into public spaces. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. And I just want to say I want to cheer with everything that Kevin was saying. He's absolutely put his finger on the button of how these local innovation is not picked up in policy and turned into the norm. And we've been trying over the years to help those local innovators to be heard. Recently, we have been supported by the National Lottery to run some pilots that will demonstrate that these things are eminently possible and you can do fantastic food culture in schools, for example. In Aberdeen, a scheme called Give Peas a Chance, fantastic farmer called Phil Swire up there who was growing green split peas, mainly for animal fodder, as I understand. And he thought, well, why isn't this going into school food? We're all trying to move to a more plant-based diet these days. We're trying to introduce children to the food of the future. Why aren't his organic, local split peas into schools? But it's hard for a farmer to break into that without some support. It's the facilitation of that that's very important. It's through trading, through the markets, through enabling people to know that it's there and for it to arrive on time and all those things. So through our Bridging the Gap programme, we're helping to subsidise the cost of that transfer, because it does often cost a bit more to make the transfer. But once you've established the supply chains, once you've established that relationship and you see all the multiple benefits of doing that, helping the local economy, helping the farmer, helping the chefs, making it possible for that to arrive on the plates and celebrating that, enjoying that, children being introduced to and feeling proud of the fact that the split peas on their plate are from a local organic farmer who's helping nature, helping climate, has a great story to tell. This is what we've all been talking about for years, isn't it? Knowing where your food comes from and that the food on your plate tastes better because there's a great story that comes with it.
But Kevin's just told us that story about DEFRA refusing to let the Public Sector Catering Alliance join the committee in the corridors of power on the grounds that the CEO of Compass Group is already on the council.
We need public sector caterers at the table talking about the innovation that will allow agroecological farming to do well in this country, for farmers to know that they are being valued and helped to get into public sector contracts, and for the money to flow into the right places, and for the good food to end up on the plate so that people really appreciate it. Of course, those public sectors, caterers need to be at the table because they've got all the solutions. Another of the initiatives that we're supporting through the Bridging the Gap programme is to get fruit and veg from small-scale organic farmers around London into the supply chain for schools in Hackney and really to see how that works. That doesn't work with mass-scale catering. It works with a great chef, in this case called James Taylor, in a Hackney school, saying, how can I work with this supply chain? Oh, there's a glut of organic produce. It's arriving. How can I creatively use that into a menu? How can I talk to the children about that and help them to understand that that's the way farming works? They're also using pulses from a company called Hodmedods. Hodmedods are trying to aggregate lots of pulses, again, to help with the protein transition away from intensively produced meat and towards a better balance of planet-friendly food. And those pulses are coming into those school meals as well.
But where is the government currently at with reaching that target of 50% of the food served in public places being British or sourced from environmentally sound producers? I mean, that's a commitment of theirs.
Yes, and it was interesting that that commitment appeared in quite a few of the manifestos for the political parties in the last general election. I don't think they know because they haven't measured it. So in January this year, they committed to measure it, but that isn't the commitment yet to buy it. And that's the bit that matters, isn't it, for the farmer? We need those standards. So at the same time, there's a national food strategy promised to us. It's just beginning to start having meetings and having conversations. But if I do not see standards for public sector food procurement, I'm going to get really cross. Kevin, we're going to be on more letters, I can feel it, because we've done this before, haven't we? For 20 years we've been saying public sector food standards should be central to national food security, to a national commitment to farming, to making sure that the money flows into the right places.
So what are the other reasons for growing our food here?
So the reasons for growing it here are about food security, aren't they? They're about what Professor Tim Lang, another professor who's fantastically shaping our thinking, just like Kevin Morgan, has said about civil food resilience in a world in which climate change is happening, the weather is changing, in which there is war happening, isn't there, and supply chains are being disrupted by that. We have to be more clear about where our food is coming from and to make some nutritional security as well. So it's not just that there is enough calories, but also that those calories get to people and that they're of quality, so they are more from plants. And our horticulture industry in this country is really on its knees, partly because the margins are so small, partly because they are having their price squeezed all the time. Public sector food procurement is our money and could be used in order to support that whole system. It's not the only thing to do, but it is a big jigsaw piece that allow farmers to have a more secure possibility of making a living out of what they're doing.
Let's move back to Wales now for a few minutes to meet Katie Palmer from Food Sense Wales. That's a charity that's been working on a project called Welsh Veg in Schools. And Katie, your latest report suggests you believe around 25% of all vegetables in schools across Wales could be Welsh organic by 2030. Is that true?
Yes, that's how we've crunched our numbers based on the experience that we've had over the last 3 years in building a movement of stakeholders who all want to see us building horticulture in Wales through that secure marketplace that the public sector can provide.
Right. Well, tell us about this project.
So Welsh Veg in Schools started off over a coffee in Cardiff with a grower and a wholesaler who supply some of the school contracts. And I think one of the really important elements to understand is that we have 22 local authorities in Wales. 20 of those 22 local authorities provide their own school meals to the majority of primary schools. So Welsh Veg in Schools is really taking the opportunity that Welsh Government have provided in the commitment to provide universal free school meals to all children in Wales. That provides us with a very secure marketplace for vegetables. And in Wales, we're only producing around a quarter of portion of veg per head of population. on around 0.2% of land. So our horticulture sector is on an incredibly low baseline. And those things that we were discussing have been discussed about resilience, for example, means that we're having to import a lot of our veg currently into the school meal service. Most of it is frozen. Most of it comes in from the Netherlands. And before that, we don't know where it comes from. So we know we're importing product from abroad that could be from countries which are, suffering with climate change. So we need to be building resilience within Wales. So with the universal free school meal commitment, with all children in primary schools in Wales receiving a school meal, we wanted to set about how could we make sure that as much of that economic benefit was being provided through horticulture in Wales, and with that then the added benefits that we would see through climate and nature as well.
So you're working with some very big firms, some big wholesalers. Can you explain their involvement?
Yeah, so we've been working with the wholesalers that supply the food into the local authorities who then prepare that food for the children. And we've been working with them to basically bring all the growers' product together. So we'll be working with a number of different growers. The wholesaler will communicate with those growers, collect the product, and then deliver the product as part of their service each week.
The vegetables going into your scheme have to be organic, Katie.
That's right. All of the growers are either organically certified or are working towards organic certification. And the reason for that is that the only way really to demonstrate those benefits of carbon and being nature friendly and helping increase biodiversity is by organic certification. And we'll need that for the public procurement.
The difference, it seems to me, somebody sort of looking at this from London, is that you've got more government involvement in this in Wales, more government support.
So the support is twofold. First of all, we have a legislative environment in Wales that we can leverage into this. So we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act.
Tell me what that means.
So the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act places a duty for public bodies in Wales to protect the interests of future generations in all of their decision making. In addition to that, we have the Social Values and Public Procurement Act, which places a duty on public bodies to do socially responsible procurement. So in terms of sort of the legislative framework, it's much more amenable to this work happening. But I think also it's thinking about that social partnership element. So government is very keen to work in partnership with businesses. And I think Welsh Veg in Schools is a really great example of how we're working with growers, how we're working with the wholesalers, and we're working with organisations that are in the third sector as well.
Earlier this week, the Welsh Government said it's going to spend £2 million to support a new community food strategy, financing initiatives such as the ones being run by Katie's organisation, Food Sense Wales. It aims to increase public spending on Welsh food and suppliers by at least 50% by 2030, supporting small-scale horticulture with more grants and training. While a report from the think tank Green Alliance this week estimated that expanding UK fruit and veg growing could increase farm profits, create jobs, and add £2.3 billion to the economy. Let's bring in Derek right now from Blackpool Council's catering department. Since 2019, they've moved from working with 11 schools to 32. That's now 32 schools in one of the most deprived towns in Britain, with kitchens on site cooking from scratch. 75% of the food they buy is produced in the UK, and they use only meat that's classified under a farm assurance scheme. The menus are seasonal, and in-season produce is highlighted for pupils. Derek, why did you make this change in Blackpool?
Obviously, food is very important to us here in Blackpool, with a high emphasis on boosting nutrition and health within the town. We have 150 employees, and over a number of years, we were one of the first areas to really have high academisation. And that obviously led to services being fragmented. So we've really worked in partnership with our schools to deliver a service that meets their needs and our young people's needs. And it's all backed up by a fantastic workforce here in Blackpool of 150 employees who are so dedicated to providing nutritious school meals every day.
When I first met you at a farmers and caterers meeting in Lancashire, you talked about the frustration of, Blackpool is right on the edge of the Fylde. Fylde is one of the great veg-growing areas of England. And yet so much of the food that was being used in schools was coming from a long, long way away.
Yeah, I think I've grown up in a farming community within the Fylde, and food was very much at the heart of growing up. And I think it's so important that we shift that food security back. We work with local providers to ensure that nutrition is on the plate, making the benefits of obviously the public money that we spend in. When we look at the way, say, school meals have gone, it's gone very convenience-based. Being a chef by trade, I do believe that we need to be going back to basics and really utilising local and seasonal produce and really thinking about our menu cycles and embedding that in our children's diets.
But how did you push through that change?
So pushing through that change has been quite difficult. We've grown at such a rapid rate, and the workforce is the key. If you think about the fragmentation of that change and staff coming back into the local authority hands, it's taken a lot of training with our development chefs and our area managers to really embed those skills back in the operation, realising that convenience product is boosting ultra-processed food within our service. We need to strip that out and getting back to those basics and really upskilling our staff for the future. That's one area that we never really focus on, is that workforce. That we talk a lot about the high level, but underneath that, we need a strong workforce to deliver consistently and be able to take that produce from farms and really produce good quality, nutritious meals.
I mean, what the example you used at that meeting was that they were using imported mashed potato, which of course had to have a lot of things added to it to make it, fly all those miles.
Yeah, definitely. The way budgets are tight, convenience product has become a norm within the sector. It's a norm across the industry. The scale of what we buy, say, with mashed potato, we were spending £14,500 roughly on frozen mashed potato. The same in volume weight of potatoes, we're talking around £4,000. So now we've got capacity to invest in our staff team and move it forward to the next product. So we're looking at all different angles to really make the most of the finances that we've got.
That's an issue that came up at St Peter's Hospital, of course. Training the staff creates change in attitudes to food. I mean, they grow in pride and they have skills they can move around with. Kath, the role of cost in this. It's interesting, the St Peter's Hospital, the food is so good that everybody eats there. When the restaurant wasn't very good, hardly anybody ate there. So therefore, everything's more costly. It's a circle. How do you sort of create this virtuous circle?
When you think of a school or a hospital, it's like a whole mini economy to itself. So some of the best examples I've ever seen have been those where absolutely the staff are eating the same food as the people who are the beneficiaries of that institution, whether they're hospital patients or school children, so that everybody appreciates the value of why they're doing this thing, which is to buy good food and serve good food and link that to health and good stories and saying where it's come from. So I think you'll remember we once went to see our old friend Mike Duckett, no longer with us sadly. He used the profits from his cafe in a hospital, Royal Brompton in West London, to subsidise the patient meals, because he said this whole economy of this hospital, we're not letting out the coffee shops to corporates who can take the money out of my economic institution of the hospital. We're bringing that money back in to help the whole thing work economically, to do the things we want to do, always bringing in that principle of public money for public goods, for the benefit of the patients, for the benefit of the school children, and for the benefit of the farmers who are supplying that good food, who we all rely on.
Katie, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and we have to get back to building those connections back into our supply chain. That's connecting the children to where their food comes from, and it's taking the opportunity for children to visit farms and for farmers to be able to supply into the service. But it's also building those connections between the farmers and the caterers. The connections for us that we've seen through working with growers and the wholesalers have been absolutely invaluable in each party understanding where the challenges are in the system. And the bit I was talking there about risk earlier is one of those aspects of it. But, you know, I'm a parent as well. And, you know, I would love to know that my children are eating their 2 portions of veg from a local grower and eating food that isn't damaging the environment or their health. And I think we have to be much more vocal about that.
Producer Natalie Donovan and I were recently in Copenhagen, where a high percentage of the food that went into school meals and into public catering had to be organic. Could we do that in Britain? Is that possible?
Yes. I mean, as I said, I think from a Wales perspective, certainly, there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't be producing, as we say, 25%, even 50% of our veg for schools. But we have to invest in the right things. We've got to pay the right price for the food in the first place. We've got to invest in the infrastructure, you know, infrastructure on farms, but also more of that kind of regional infrastructure has been lost. You know, through the Welsh Veg in Schools, we were massively challenged because we ended up growing 9 tonnes of carrots, but had no carrot washer. So then we had to kind of work out how you can get these 9 tonnes of carrots moved around to where there was a carrot washer, get them washed, and then get them delivered to the school. And we've lost all of that infrastructure over the last 20 to 30 years, and we have to invest in it. So it needs some pump priming, this. We need to invest in these things now to support the growers, to grow the sector and enable us down the line to be able to have a more resilient supply chain.
Derek Wright in Blackpool, you spoke very powerfully when I saw you in Lancashire about this link to the future of Britain, really, that if we're not feeding children to a high standard in schools with delicious food. I mean, it's no use it being just nutritious and healthy unless it gets eaten. If we're not going to do that, we're undercutting the future of the entire country.
Oh, definitely. We place such a high value, don't we, on the treatments through the NHS and the medications. We place a high value on the education. But the single biggest thing that we could do is just invest in public sector food to really change nutrition and health of our young people and prevent treatments and health inequalities within our young people and that population. I'm really passionate about that. You know, that investment is a really small thing to get right, and it will make massive impacts in the future.
Kevin, is there anything you'd like to say as your final thoughts on what we've been talking about?
Simply this, Sheila, that the good food revolution goes right to the heart of a healthy, well-being society. And public food provisioning should be the leader rather than the laggard of that revolution. And I think we've heard the stories today which helps us to share good practice and show what can be done locally, but we need to scale that up nationally, and the way to do that is through more political will.
Kath Dalmeny?
Here we are in a year where we're promised a national food strategy that could provide the infrastructure, the impetus, the rules, the money that can make all of this happen. We have to call for that and to say that the jewel in the crown is getting public sector food right. And I see a national food strategy, we're standing on a knife edge. It could either go the way of business as usual, or it could go the way of saying that this local approach really matters and needs to be given a national platform and the right kind of resourcing. And of course, we're talking about money at a time when the IMF has just announced that, you know, terrible things are going on with the international economy. Don't lose hope, guys, because we managed to get a sugary drinks tax, didn't we, that now ploughs lots of money back into health promotion for children. Why can't we do a junk food tax or something similar that would transfer large amounts of cash to pay for this? Because the infrastructure for those carrot washers, the cloning of Derek is going to cost a bit with the cloning machine. We do need to pay some money into this to make the transition, but it's not that much. We really can do this.
My last sceptical question to you is that the government has just announced the board to advise them on their food strategy with very little representation for people involved in public procurement.
Well, our great white hope, or shall I say our great green hope on that board, is Anna Taylor from the Food Foundation, who's absolutely fabulous. She needs our support on that panel, otherwise it will be business as usual. So let's make sure that our voices really are heard and that no more letters can come from DEFRA saying you're not part of the party. We have to be. We've got the solutions. We can get these rolled out at scale.
Katie, are you optimistic?
One of the things that hasn't been mentioned is there's a discussion about it being a UK food strategy and how are the devolved nations represented on that board. That's not very obvious to me, so I would question that.
And finally, Derek, are you feeling optimistic?
I feel optimistic, but I would say that we shouldn't be treating the public plate really as a commodity. We should be treating it as an investment in the future, and best value shouldn't mean the cheapest. It should mean an investment into good produce for young people and the wider population.
Derek Wright from Blackpool Catering Services. We asked DEFRA about the makeup of the new Food Strategy Advisory Board. DEFRA says the development of the strategy is not a job for government or the board alone, and it will be collaborating with other players in the sector to generate ideas and identify opportunities, including civil service organisations and citizens. How that will be done isn't explained. But to quote from their email to us, the full spectrum of food supply stakeholders will have an opportunity to engage with the food strategy as it develops. Our cross-government strategy will make sure that our food system can continue to feed the nation, realise its potential for economic growth, and protect the planet and nourish individuals now and into the future. Well, thanks to all our guests and contributors today. Feeding the nation, it's so basic, and for so long it's been ignored. So here's to the entrepreneurs and visionaries who are making a difference. The team at St Peter's Hospital in Chertsey, Surrey, Derek Wright from Blackpool Catering Services, Katie Palmer from Food Sense Wales, running the Welsh Veg in Schools project, Kath Dalmeny from Sustain, and Professor Kevin Morgan from Cardiff University. It's not a subject that's going to go away, and we'll be following developments. If you've anything to add, we'd absolutely love to hear from you.
Our email address is thefoodprogram@bbc.co.uk, and the programme was produced by Natalie Donovan in Bristol.
News moves fast, but understanding takes time. In a world of misinformation and constant updates, Currently from BBC Radio 4 presents documentaries that bring you closer to the heart of the story and go beyond the headlines. From undiscovered truths and hidden stories to the biggest issues of the day, we go further and unravel the untold.
Well, let's talk about borrowing costs and whether the Chancellor has a problem.
The UK's national debt has risen dramatically, but how worried should we be?
To dramatic moments that reveal how the world really works. We bring you the stories from those closest to them.
It all felt so ominous. How this vast machine, built of metal by human hands, could be broken by a simple collision with a bird.
Where the world of news comes to life and your perspective changes.
German politics is usually stable, but that's not true anymore.
Listen to Currently on BBC Sounds and to not miss an episode.